Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And let's start off by a quick reference to Beryl's reading there, which was very nice and very apt, I think, for this afternoon's talk and discussion. Because in that reading, Beryl referred to humanity, to us, as children of the universe, which we truly are. And that we're too great, too big, by birthright, to be limited by our own design or fear or outside fears even. And this is one of the lessons that Theosophy teaches right from the start. That we are part of this incredible creation, we're not separate from it, and that there is nothing out there that is actually intent on harming us. The whole is intent on lifting us to the highest possible state that we can achieve. And today's talk is about universal law, divine law, and how we and everything else are inherent part of that. Now, what we have to start off by thinking is, where do these laws come from? What are these divine laws and where do they come from? That's the whole point, really. These laws, divine laws, sometimes called the laws of nature, which are distinct to man-made laws, they're not the same thing at all, are inherent in creation itself. And this is why we can't get around them. Because we are part of creation. And therefore, anything that creation is inherently in itself, we are a part of that. So laws are not outside creation. They're not imposed upon the creation from outside. They're actually inherent within creation itself. In the same way that the laws governing anything are inherent in that thing. That can get very scientific, and we could go on that for a bit. It'll only be a diversion, really. And because of this inherent nature of divine law, we say that these laws are universal. So from that we can see that there is nothing outside of them. Now in Theosophy, we call the universe, creation, we call it an absolute being. We say it's absolute rather than saying God or a creator, because by using the word absolute, we are saying that there's nothing else. It's absolutely everything that there is. And in that statement is implied that there is nothing outside of that one single life, and that it is one single life. Now, we have to understand that in terms of our own lives, because we are separate lives. My life is separate to Beryl's, and separate to Julie's, and separate to Norma's. Yet at the same time, we are part of the same life, in the same way that this finger is separate from that finger, but it's part of the same body, and is governed by the same rules of my body. So therefore every individual, everything in creation, from an atom to a star, is part of one thing. They're not all different things, they're aspects of one thing. Like saying the facets on a diamond are not separate things. It's a diamond, and that diamond has several facets. Life is one thing like the diamond, and everything so-called within it are facets or aspects of that one life, that one thing. This is a big thing to get our heads around, because we spend 1,000 incarnations as human beings thinking ourselves to be separate from everything else. We're not. what we're getting confused with, is the appearance of things. Right? So I appear to be separate from Beryl, but in truth I'm not. My spiritual essence is the same as Beryl's. Everything is the same as everything else, but being expressed in a different way. This is why we have at the one hand that everything, as Beryl said, is unique. Each individual is unique, yet is the very same. It's a marvellous thing about life. Out there, there is such a diversity of expressions, of outer expressions, of appearances of things, yet they're only manifestations of one thing. And that one thing we call the absolute. Religions call it God, the Creator. There's different there's just labels, aren't there? The lady who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 was a very advanced thinker and a very advanced soul, H.P. Helen Petrovna Blavatsky. She wrote The Secret Doctrine, which has been in print ever since, and it's a most famous book, a most deep philosophical tome. When she wrote it, it was totally alien to the thought of that time, and that time was a deeply Victorian era. She made statements in that book that the scientific and medical establishments just laughed at, but later come to see she was right. For instance, she said in the 1870s that the atom was not only divisible, could not only be broken up, but could be infinitely broken up. And they laughed and they laughed and they laughed. Until Niels Bohr and a few others in the early part of the 20th century started to realize that there might be some truth in this. And then with the breaking of the atom, even later on, and the discovery of particles within the atom, and now the discovery of particles within those particles, she's been proved to be absolutely correct. But how would she know that in 1875? And not only know it, but to actually state it publicly against all the scientific opinion. So it wasn't just a vague, oh, I think the atom is divisible. She was actually stating it as a scientific fact. So that's, I say this to sort of give you a measure of the woman. This is only one tiny example of her breadth of knowledge and wisdom. But it gives you a marker on just where her thinking process has reached. And I'm doing this because I want to quote what she calls, in the beginning of The Secret Doctrine, fundamental propositions. And these propositions, she says, are fundamental in the way that there is no way that you can disprove them. There's no way that you can get round them. They're not up for as an option. If you want to pull them apart and argue with them, you're wasting your time, because they are fundamental to life. It's like arguing against the birds and the bees and saying, no, no, no. Well, we all know that that is fundamental to life. Without that process of male-female reproduction, there would be no life. So certain things are given. And she gives these three propositions, which are so wide-ranging and yet so succinct. And I'm going to look at these in terms of what we're talking about, which is universal law. You can look at the propositions in other terms as well, but let's do it in terms of law. First proposition, she says that creation is the expression of a power that is omnipresent, limitless, and eternal. Creation is the expression of a power that is omnipresent, limitless, and eternal. That sentence is incredible. Creation is the expression of a power that is eternal, limitless, absolute, and eternal, infinite. But that's only the start of the proposition.
Wow.
Therefore, everything is subject to its will. And this power is within all aspects of that creation, carrying out its purpose. This is astonishing stuff. This is where the expression, thy will be done, comes from. In the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done. Thy meaning it, the creator, that power that creates the universe. It's not our will to be done, it's its will to be done. We are part of it. Woe betide us if we ever try to be something else besides part of it, because we would be like, again, so insignificant at the side of it. Right? It's better to be part of it than to think of yourself as independent or something separate. Why would you want to do that? So, creation is the expression of a power that is omnipresent, that is everywhere, limitless and eternal. Therefore, everything is subject to its will, and this power is within all aspects of that creation, carrying out its purpose. The second proposition, actually these propositions are more than this. I've just pulled out 2 or 3 sentences from each. The second one says, the law relating to movement or progression in creation is that everything must move in cycles. Not shall or will or could or may, but must. No options here. Everything moves in cycles. Now you might think, well, I'm not moving in a cycle when you go to Tesco's. Well, you are, because you come back, don't you? But, well, hopefully you do. Although in Julie's case, sometimes I wonder. I left the shopping yesterday and I went and sat in the car because I didn't feel too well. And I thought, she said, I'm only going to get a few things. An hour later, she turned up again. By which time I'd been there, been taken by an ambulance to hospital, had an operation.
Managed to spend £70.
Oh, I know, this is a trouble, isn't it?
Oh, no. Right, so the law relating to, but yes, because this cyclic thing is in your life, because you go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning, you go through your day, morning, afternoon, evening, night time, you go to sleep again. It's a cycle. You're born, you grow up, you live, you go to Tesco's a few 100 million times, and then you get old and someone else goes for you, and then you end up in a nursing home, and then you die.
Oh my God.
And then you go on to an afterlife, which is something else we can talk about on another day, we will do. And then you go into a kind of retreat, spiritual retreat, where the spirit is drawn back into itself. And then finally, you come out and be born again. And the cycle is complete again. Everything, the seasons, the planets, the stars, the atoms, all must and do move in cycles. Can't move in a straight line, they all move in cycles. And those cycles, if you want to think of them as circles, because they're not just coming back on themselves and repeating themselves, they're actually spirals, which are cycles, progressing cycles, which themselves are part of spirals, and so on and so on. So, the law related to movement or progression in creation is that everything must move in cycles. All processes, however great or small, can only operate in accord with this law. Nothing moves outside this cyclic pattern. So when you think to yourself, goodness me, I'm repeating, my life's just the same thing day after day after day. What's life for? What's it all about? It's up to you to progress your life in cycles, not get stuck in one, right? Because this is the trouble with cycles. You can get stuck in them. Because it is movement that moves in cycles, not static states. Nothing is actually static. If you become static, it's an attitude of mind. And so you must break out of that by thinking something new, planning something new, looking at things from a different way. The third proposition is that all expressions of creation must pass through all cycles without exception. So now she's telling us that obviously there's lots of cycles out there. Too many to count, isn't they? When you think of the cycles of atoms and the cycles of planets and the cycles of stars and the cycles of human lives and the cycles of animals. So she's saying here, all expressions of creation, we are an expression of creation, must pass through all cycles without exception. Well, that's an odd one then, isn't it? Where am I going to go from here then? I'm a human being at the moment, semi-intelligent, I will say so myself. Reasoning, thinking, I'm trying to be the best I can be, I'm trying to evolve quietly in my own way, I'm trying to help my fellow man, I'm trying to enjoy myself at the same time. What cycles are beyond me that I've got to come to yet? Theosophy will tell us what those cycles are. They're incredible. The cycles of higher spiritual reality that we've yet to even glimpse, most of us. And these are cycles that are so incredibly beautiful, so incredibly magnificent, that we can hardly wait. But wait we must, because we've got through the necessary cycles between now and then. And then looking back, I wasn't always this person. What was I like 100 reincarnations ago, 100 lives ago? What was I like then? But I wasn't as intelligent as I think I am now, for a start. I probably didn't live longer than 20 or 30 years old. My life would have been very hard. I would have been struggling and working from morning to night. I'm going to do that now. No, I would have been concerned mostly with just survival. And that would have been a totally different life. But I would have been locked into the cycles of nature around me to survive, wouldn't I?
Yes.
More so than I am now, because we create artificial cycles, don't we? So that when the sun goes down, we don't have to go to bed. We can watch telly, mind you. And we can do other things. We can put our computers on. We can go out in our car. We can go to the cinema. We can go for a meal. We can go visit people. But in those days, we couldn't even go up beyond the village. And when the sun went down, that was it. So life has changed. Those cycles have moved on. And before that, what was I like before I was a human being? Where did I come from? I wasn't just suddenly created as a human being. That's a Bible myth. And on the sixth day, God created man, or whatever day it was. Rubbish. Man has evolved to what he is. But out of what? Well, Darwin says we evolved out of animals. Yeah. Certainly our physical bodies have benefited from the development of physical bodies in animals, and their bodies were benefited from the development of cellular growth and structure in plants before that. And those vegetables and plants, they got their blueprints and patterns and energy systems from mineral formations before that. But what happened before that? Before that, life wasn't physical. It was on an astral level, where all these things were gone through in an astral sense rather than a physical. Does that make sense? Can you imagine how we could have minerals, vegetables, animals, and humans in an astral world before physical worlds were available? Yeah, because when you're dead in the future, you will live in a world like that in the astral world. And what I'm saying to you now is that was there before the physical world. So that's where we came from, and we'll pass through that cycle on our bigger cycle now. And before that, all these things were sort of developed and the patterns vaguely established at the mental level, in the mental plane. But we're now talking so far back in time, in cycles, that to even attempt to put a number on it would be ridiculous. I couldn't even say so many billion, trillion, quadrillions back. You know, science has got these incredible numbers now, and they don't count them, you just stick them in equations and bring them out again later. But you can't count that time back, it's so far back. But we were there.
10 to the infinite.
This spark within you and me, which is spiritual, had gone through all that evolution to get to this stage now where it can wear a physical body with a brain, with feelings and thinking and the energy structures, and all that we are now has come out of all that we were then.
But
It was not created like that. And we can say from the wisdom that we've been handed down from beings who passed beyond our stage and have turned around and give us information to help us, that we're just beyond the halfway point. Just beyond the halfway point. All that has only been the halfway point. The first half of the great cycle, the Maha cycle. So if you think the difference between that vague thing that was us, that little tiny spark in the darkness of the void, that has evolved to a human being, you imagine that journey going on for the same length of time into the higher realms, with full consciousness now, with awareness that is growing all the time. That's why I said that our future cycles are so incredible. All expressions of creation must pass through all cycles, without exception. There are no shortcuts, no jumping this or that stage. That's it. You can't jump a bit. You can't say, well, miss out the next 200 lifetimes, I'll just go to the sublime bit. Although there are people in this world and religious views that would suggest we could do that. Get off the wheel of rebirth. You know, let's drop all that now and become divine. We are divine, we should be divine. Yeah, we are divine on this great, incredible journey. We have to continue the journey. We can't just jump off. We may refuse to see the next step, and we may waste lifetimes going back over well-trodden ground. But by doing so, we are only trying to avoid the inevitable. Despite our ignorance, one way or another, we will complete the course set out for us in the divine plan, which is evolution. One way or another, those little tiny atoms in this paper will complete that course of evolution. At some point, the spark that was in every atom in this paper will become a human being. I find this staggering. I mean, I can sit here and say these words, and it's very impressive, and it's wow, mind-boggling. But this is real. And this is why this same woman says at some point that this absolute being is beyond our thoughts, and that we can only minimalize and reduce it by thinking about it, because we have to bring it down to our level. We can't reach to its level. It's too incomprehensible. But we can try, because that's good for the mind. But don't expect to succeed. When you think you succeeded in doing that, you've created a god. You created a god of the Christians. You created a god of the Muslim. You created a god of the Hebrew. These are not the absolute. These are the absolute reduced to your size, which is ridiculous, really, isn't it? What we have to do is increase our power and our conscious awareness to its size. That's what it is trying to do. At the end of the day, all this evolution, which all these aspects of creation are going through, is it going through it. It's the absolute that's evolving, and we are its evolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say that bit again. The absolute is evolving.
And we are its
Evolution.
Yes, we are its evolution.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that what's meant by God created man in its own?
Yes, absolutely, in its own image. you see, a lot of the Bible sayings and text are actually, were originally sacred wisdom.
I know it, but it's just...
And what happened is, when the Bible is being compiled, and especially at the Council of Nicaea in 300 AD, they had to put it in words that they could set up a religion from, and they had to
control, yes.
And also they didn't understand some of these things that have been passed down for 30,000 years from India. And they weren't in English or Latin, they were in Sanskrit and in Senzon.
They were probably hidden in caves or something.
They were actually,
Yeah.
yes, a lot of them, yes.
Yeah.
And then the interpretation had been lost over centuries upon centuries, and then they emerge in this form we call Christianity, or Hinduism, or Buddhism, or Zen, or Zoroastrianism, and so on. And if you look at this phrases, you'll see this original truth lying behind them. And your example was
God created man
in his own image.
in his own image.
In other words, we are part of that God, therefore what else could we be?
Absolute.
Because that's what it says in the...
has defined it to God.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But in actual fact, it's God that's defined man, isn't it? We are a part of it. And then someone is saying on Thursday, quite rightly, this is a holographic principle, where you take one bit and it's got the whole in it. You know, a hologram, you smash it up into pieces and you pick one piece up and you can see the whole picture again in that little bit. And life is like that. Every little bit of life contains the whole. Because it is the whole. So we can gain a lot of insight into the nature of life, the true nature of our life and the life around us, by meditating on these concepts. And if you bought the Secret Doctrine and you did no more than read these three, which I've extracted little bits of and put my own words to make it clearer, if you just read the three fundamental propositions between now and when you leave this earth, and meditated on them and thought about them, you would put your thinking way above the mass of humanity by miles. You would understand life so much more. But you don't have to just do that, because other people have made commentaries on that and have done the thinking for us. And give us a great start on this by saying, like I've done today, I've explained some of it to you. So I think this is the value of a society like Theosophy. People say, well, why do we want a Theosophical society? What good is it anyway? You know, we can get all this stuff off the internet or something, but you can get some of it on the internet, sure you can. And you can get more and more as time goes by now. But the way I've benefited from the society over the years, and from knowing and speaking to other theosophies, is this great bequested inheritance of people who have done this thinking. It saves me having to reinvent the wheel, you see. But supposing I'd been through all this in my last life, and got all these, you know, because they've been around centuries, this stuff, millions of years really, but in this form they've been around centuries. So supposing in my life, I've spent 30, 40 years studying it all, and good comprehensive understanding of it. And then I'm born in this life, and what do I do? Start all over again?
No, you're taking.
So what happens is I start talking to other people, I come to a society like this, and it starts making sense to me, because I've already been through it somewhere in my past. I've been through it. It rings a bell, it starts to be clear. Whereas, say, 4 lifetimes ago, you'd just say, well, a lot of rubbish, I can't understand what you're talking about. But now you can understand what I'm talking about. So that's the value of these societies, that you can pass on and help each other, remember, and then add to that, you see, as you go through your life, because you need to come out of your life at one end a little bit more aware than you came in at the beginning.
Of course,
yeah, you do, don't you? Otherwise,
yeah. It's taken me a while to accept this, actually.
yeah,
from
that's
my
right. It does,
conditioning.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think this is why most of us really start to take this kind of knowledge in more when we get older, into the last phase of our life, if you like, because the early parts of life is busy establishing a life, isn't it? And then catching up with where you were at before in terms of your mental awareness and your life circumstances, and then gradually it starts to percolate through what you've inherited from your own past, and then by association with other people, and it's just a simple conversation at a bus stop can start it all off, you know, just an innocent remark someone makes. So in the highest sense, the laws that control the processes of creation are expressions of higher forms of life. Now this is another aspect I want to touch on now. This is getting more into the mechanics of it, just a little bit. I don't want to get too heavy, but if I can paraphrase this rather than reading the text bits, because the higher forms of life I'm talking about are what you would call angels, or what in the Asian pantheon they call devas. Devas, yeah. Which means shining one, basically. And it's interesting to note, isn't it, that when the Christians went into Persia and India and wanted to convert them, and they wouldn't be converted, they started to denigrate the local customs and the local labels and descriptions. So David become devil.
Oh, really?
And that's where the word devil comes from.
Oh.
Because if you won't join us, you're against us.
Yes.
So your gods, your angels, to us, and they actually then coined the word angel, which is something to do with angle, really. But Deva, which means shining one, they turned into devil. Anyway, that's an aside. So these angels, these devas, are arrayed in ranks upon ranks upon ranks. Although I'm not talking about soldiers now, I'm not talking about people standing in rows. But in terms of hierarchical structure, it's probably easy to see from the other way around. If you think of creation starting, then the first things to start to emerge are the most highest, most spiritual, pure beings. Right. The Dayan Chohans, or the archangels. Although these angels just before the archangels we call the Dayan Chohan. This is bad. Labels are not important here. But what happens is, out of these Maha Buddhas, great pure beings, unfold from their energy, from their nature, from their mind, from their consciousness, unfold the archangels. And from the archangels unfold things like the Pika and the builders and other ranks of angels. And from them lesser angels and so on. So really they're like Russian dolls. Yeah. They all unfold one from within the other. Now Madame Blavatsky says somewhere, at some point in this year, I'll be giving this quote, that the whole universe is created, is guided and controlled by untold, infinite numbers of ranks of angelic beings. Now, this is where the word where it's not so much creation as recreation. What these beings do is they remember. Like we do when we get to the bus stop and someone says something, it starts to come back. They remember the time before. Now, when was the time before? The time before was the time that the Absolute last did this. Went through this process umpteen times before, just like you had umpteen lives before, it had umpteen lives before. And each time the Absolute's life comes to a close and everything is drawn back in, all these beings are rolled back in, but they remember. They hold it in their nature. It's what they have become. So when the Absolute starts to unfold again, a new creation, out unfolds these beings who remember, put back together the creation as it was when it closed the last time. And it does that so you don't have to start all over again. And then throughout the whole term of the creation, more evolution, more progress can be made from that point. And at that point, when that creation is finished, all that is rolled up
Yes.
and then remembered for the next time.
Yes.
In the same way that when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to start your life all over again. You remember who you are. Remember what you're up to. Unless you're getting a bit past it like me, then sometimes you wonder. But anyway, that's the process, you see. So the laws of nature, the laws of the universe, universal laws, divine law, is the expression of those beings. Like I said, everything has that qualities, those laws, inherent within it. These beings are so mighty, so universal in their nature, that their consciousness is the law that is expressed in that creation. Now, there are beings right at the start who express the prime law, and that is the law of karma. Right? Now, that is the law of laws, because all of the laws come as a consequence of that law. Karma is the law that strives always to bring the duality of life into balance. And life is a duality. When the duality is gone, life is gone. When life starts again, the duality springs back into being, and that means then there's a balance needed between the two. Otherwise one would dominate and the whole thing would run away lopsidedly. So right through creation, from that point on, the law of karma, which is the nature of these very, very high beings, which pervades the whole of creation, is bringing everything into balance. As it goes out of balance, it brings it back in again. It may take microseconds, or it may take a million lifetimes, but one way or another, everything is held back into that perfect balance. You can imagine a creation running away with itself, which it is doing, as it diversifies into the multiverse, yet at the end, when it's starting to come to a close and everything's being drawn back in again, what is happening is everything is being satisfied. Everything is being
Brought to balance.
brought back into balance. Resolved.
Resolved. Yeah.
All the issues of the universe are gradually resolved until there is only that one issue left, the negative and the positive, and then they virtually wrap themselves together into one thing, and the whole thing is gone again.
They must be very busy all the time.
Yet, but they're not doing anything. It is what they are.
What they are. Yeah, it's what. Yeah.
It's what they are.
What they're there for.
They're balancing.
Yeah.
The same as the Lepayaka, who are the scribes, the recorders. They don't sit there writing on tablets. Hang on, he's done that, hasn't he? That's 4:05. Not last time, we were 3 minutes past 4. Oh, hang on, that atom's just hit the other atom. Hang on. They can't write all that down. They witness it. And in witnessing it, it is written within them. Their memory. And they become it. So you see how creation works now. It doesn't work by people so much, by these things imposing these things on everybody and everything. It happens because it's their nature. So if we go back several creations ago, say maybe 500 creations ago, 500 universes ago, the beings that are embodying these energies and these laws were very simple. The laws were very simple. There was probably the law of attraction, the law of repulsion, gravity, and so forth. There was probably, obviously there'd be the law of karma, there'd be the law of cycles, but the cycles would be very limited. But now, 500 creations later, they have embodied so much more, they've become so much more comprehensive themselves, that life can become more comprehensive. And those same laws are applied in a far more comprehensive way, and a way that science is struggling to understand, even at the physical level, never mind all the other levels as well. So when Madame Blavatsky said, not only can the atom be divided, but it can be infinitely divided. She was talking about all this. She knew that within every physical thing was billions of other parts of things, right into the spiritual plane.
Melchizedek, I feel, has been very prominent in my life. It's meant, had a purpose.
Yeah.
And I just feel that it
Yeah.
is one of these
It is. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's something else I can say on this which may interest you. When he says on the right hand side of God, or the right hand side of creation, that must imply that some equal being is on the left hand side.
Yes.
Otherwise it'd be
Yes.
totally out of balance, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And so we get this very thorny philosophical, religious and moral question of good and evil. And I don't want to go there this afternoon. But we have to note in passing that what is on one side must be mirrored by something on the other side, otherwise the thing will spin out of control. Whether we call that evil and good is arbitrary. These are arbitrary words to my mind. It depends on the circumstance, doesn't it? If it's something doing something really nasty, we call that evil. If it's something doing something really good and benevolent, we call that good. But in creation itself, it's the opposites. And standing between those and emanating into both those is the law of karma. Now, when you say a specific being, and there's Gabriel, Ariel, and so on, these are the great archangels of the Christian pantheon, but they have Hindu names as well, but it doesn't matter. Whereas way back in the beginning, they would be individual angels. Because creation has evolved so many times since then and gone into such complexity, when we now say Gabriel or Oriel, or I can't say that word, when we now refer to an individual archangel of such magnitude, we're really referring to a whole host under that banner, if you like.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you say it has been a big factor in your life, you mean that influence, that power.
Order.
That's right, that order, what that represents has been very significant to you in your life. Now, to some people it would be the order or the energy associated with Gabriel, or or whatever. But we have to understand that by now, these beings are a whole pantheon of beings that spread out beyond measure, beyond number. Because there isn't a 7 of them. But now there are millions under each of those 7. Like it's like thinking like 7 suns, stars. And then the rays coming up those stars are numberless. The rays of light.
What about saints? Do they come into the same category?
Yes, so further down the line, where you get
Down the line.
an actual interface with humanity at a lower level, then when a human has risen to a level of inner awareness that it can be directly embody one of those rays or one of those principles, he then usually enacts in his life something which puts him above his fellow men and is then noted as a saint or whatever. Yeah. But that's this end of the scale. What we're talking about there is at the other end of the scale, where
Yes, the
they're
heights.
impossible to
Hierarchy.
define really, but we've
Yeah.
got these names that have been passed down,
Yeah.
and actually there's nothing, the name itself, you see, it's a hard name to pronounce, and even simple names like Gabriel, they're not just names, they're words of power. And that's why in the Christian and other pantheons, other religions, they learn to pronounce these words of power as effective magic. It is actually magic. The chanting in the churches, the mantras in the temples, they're all using words of power to produce effects on the inner planes. Rightly or wrongly, depending on the circumstance. So basically what these beings have evolved over all these creations is capacity capacities out of potential, his abilities out of possibilities, and attributes out of the possibility of such things. So that now we have the absolute's potentials are gradually being realized. So you think of a child being born, compare that to the absolute itself when it starts a manifestation. That child has within it certain potentials. It could be a Leonardo da Vinci, it could be a Mother Teresa, it could be Nelson Mandela, it could be a Trump. But there are potentials within that child. These are spiritual potentials which are a mirror of the potentials of the absolute. And so as each one of us evolves, we evolve those potentials into attributes, so that where there's a potential for compassion, in some future life, that compassion will be built into us and be natural to us, be a capacity that we exercise rather than a potential that we could tap into if we knew how to. And it's the same with the absolute. It's the same with these high beings. They're evolving those capacities that were latent within the absolute himself, and so are we. And in that way we are becoming like him, it, she. We are becoming in our own way to be gods in our own way. So we could ask some questions. We could say, what is the universe and where does it come from? We've answered that question. The universe is the expression of a divine being. We call it the absolute. It's come from previous manifestations. If we keep on going back and back and back, we'll never come to an answer of where it all started. That is, if it itself is impossible to comprehend, then we certainly can't comprehend where it came from. We can see the pattern, though, that it's following. And this is a sort of theosophical rule. If you want to know the pattern of something that's greater than yourself, look at yourself, because that same pattern will be found in you. If you want to know the pattern of life itself, look at your life, because your life is the same as it. And this is where the phrase "as above, so below" comes from, and as below, so above. What else exists beside the universe? We know now nothing else exists. That's it. And the human mind can't comprehend that. If I say to you the universe goes on forever, it's infinite, you can't, your mind immediately wants to put a boundary on it. It wants to say, well, there then, or there, or maybe there. All this there business is a waste of time. If it's infinite, there is no measure to it. But the human mind has to have a measure to feel safe, unthreatened. This is what governs our thinking, you see, until we get much more superconscious, is fear. We have to know that things are in a certain place and a certain order, and we can account for it. When we say infinite, we don't like that. It's dodgy. So what else exists beside the universe? Absolutely nothing. No thing. How does the universal law apply differently to different parts of the universe, such as to trees and to men? It doesn't. It applies to everything the same. And you might think, well, how does a tree like same as a human being? You know, I live a life and then I die and then I'm born again. So does a tree. But we call that cycle of growth, seeding, harvesting, and then don't we? Nature is reseeding itself, reincarnating all over and over and over.
Yeah.
Which parts of men and women are the same as the stars in the solar systems? Every part of us. Every atom is like a solar system. Every organ is like a forest, like a tree. Everything is the same, but expressed slightly differently, uniquely. That's the magic of it. That is the magic of it. We're all the same, yet different. Why is man subject to very severe karma, distinct from the karma of nature in general? Because man, and this is a point I want you to take away, man has got free will. Because he, at this stage of evolution, the spiritual spark within us has become so aware and so conscious and so thinking, it can make decisions which are beyond the normal run of things. So like, you know, your squirrel and your earthworm just do their thing. They don't think, oh, I'll start a shop. Or I'll you know, they just do what is in their nature to do. But humanity has total free range. It has free reign, it can do what it wants. And what does it do? Gets itself into trouble the whole time, doesn't it? And what happens then? Because of the law of karma and balance, it suffers, doesn't it? Yeah. And then you wonder why, you know, there's so much cancer in the world, there's so much disease in the world, there's so much everything wrong in the world. Because of the way we behave. If we want to cure cancer, then start behaving properly. That's all it needs. But the trouble here is we're stitched into everybody else's karma. So I could behave perfectly in my life. Could. But it wouldn't make me totally healthy, not at this stage anyway, because if everybody else is being nasty and horrible, I've got a share of that because I'm a human being with them. Unless I live totally out of it and to never interact with my fellow human beings at all, but then I wouldn't be a human being, would I? What would I be, some kind of alien? So, you know, this is a thing that we also have to learn when we say take responsibility for ourselves. In doing that, we take responsibility for everybody else. And you know, you can't own your karma. It doesn't belong to you exclusively. What about your husband? What about your children? What about your neighbours? What about your workmates? What about the people in the society with you? They're all interacting with you, and they all take or give according to your karma. So if you go down with cancer, it's going to affect so many people, right down to the nurses and doctors in the hospital and the ambulance drivers and everybody, and the chemists in the laboratory. So you see, we are one thing. So yes, let's try and live a perfect life, i.e. let's live within the law, let's understand the laws of nature and don't break them with our free will, because that's what we're doing at the moment, mostly. We're breaking these laws because we think we can get away with it. We don't think, for instance, that what I'm thinking is just what I'm thinking. It doesn't matter to anybody else, it actually does, because my thoughts go out to everybody else. If I'm sat here thinking nasty things while I'm talking, then you're registering it at a subliminal level and not actually private at all. So at the end of the day then, we have free will, which is the last sort of gift of the Absolute to humanity. When we reach human stage, we have this influx of power from the Absolute itself in nature, which gives us that sense of self-awareness and therefore free will, the ability to do as we please, but we pay the consequences. So when we act against nature, willingly and knowingly, or even ignorantly, because ignorance of the law is no excuse for the law, then we pay much more severe consequences than that same action done by an innocent animal, or an innocent plant, or an innocent child. This is why we don't prosecute children, because they're innocent. But when you become an adult, then you take the full force of the law, don't you? Where do all the laws of nature come from? From these incredible beings that unfold at the start of creation. We call the Devas, the Archangels, the Diamond Buddhas and so on, who actually embody these principles. They don't impose them, they are it. What came before our universe and what will come after it? Well, the universes. And those universes will progress those same laws in ever more comprehensive ways, as the divine beings who embody them also evolve at the same time as we're evolving. And someday or other, in the distant future, we will become one of those divine beings, probably collectively, you see. This is a strange thing, isn't it? Humanity is heading towards godhood. But that doesn't mean to say Eric and Norma will be gods. It means that humanity will be a god. Because we are not separate beings. Humanity is one thing. It's a life wave working its way through this system of creation at this time. It's a life wave. It's made up of different molecules and different atoms, like all waves are. Those are me and you. But it's one thing moving in one direction. At some point in the future, it will be what we now call an archangel, a god, a tiny Buddha, a Maha Buddha, overseeing with its own nature, encompassing and enveloping another new creation, where other life waves much younger and still just starting out will be coming through that same system, being influenced by our nature. Because we've been there and done that, and we can remember it, put it back together. All right, folks, that's what to do.